"You're holding it wrong," the Duke said quietly, his storm-gray eyes fixed on the ring clutched to her chest. A thief would have pocketed it by now. The signet ring burned against her palm, still carrying the heat of his hand. Emily stood frozen beside his mahogany desk, the stolen heirloom clenched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Candlelight flickered across walls lined with leather-bound records, each one a testament to generations of Hess power. The grandfather clock in the corner marked each second with cruel precision. She had come for documents, evidence, proof that would vindicate a dead man and destroy a living legacy. The ring had never been part of the plan. But the moment her fingers closed around the gold band, something fractured inside her chest. The weight was familiar. The engraving along the inner surface. She couldn't read it in the dim light, but somehow she knew it. Her breath hitched. Her vision blurred. Then the door opened. Duke William stepped into his own sanctuary, and his storm-gray eyes went immediately to the ring in her hand. Not to her face. Not to the scattered papers on his desk. To the ring. Emily should have run. Should have dropped it and invented some excuse about cleaning, about misplaced duties, about anything that would preserve the false identity she'd cultivated for 6 months. Instead, without thinking, she pressed the ring to her chest, clutching it over her heart like a relic, like something sacred, like something that had once belonged to someone she loved. The Duke's expression shifted. Not anger. Not the outrage she'd braced for. Something far more dangerous. Recognition. "You're holding it wrong," he said quietly, his voice like frost over stone. He moved closer, each footstep deliberate. A thief would have pocketed it by now, hidden it away. But you. His gaze traveled from the ring to her face, and she watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. "You're holding it like it's already yours." "It was never yours to begin with," Emily heard herself say, the words escaping before caution could stop them. "No." William stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could see the muscle tightening in his jaw. "Then whose was it, miss? Winter, isn't it? Though I doubt that's your real name." Her heart slammed against her ribs. He knew. Somehow he already knew. "Emily Winter is real enough," she said, lifting her chin even as her world began to collapse. "What isn't real is the justice that destroyed my family while yours prospered." Have you ever watched someone's entire world crack apart in real time? If you're enjoying this story so far, please give it a thumbs up, and let me know in the comments where you're reading from. William stood perfectly still in the doorway of his study, the stolen ring still pressed against Emily's chest, and felt the foundations of everything he'd inherited begin to shift. He should have summoned the household guard. Should have had her arrested, questioned, removed from his estate before dawn. The protocol was clear. The law was clear. A servant caught stealing the Duke's signet ring, the very symbol of his authority, the heirloom that had passed from father to son for 7 generations, deserved no mercy. But something about the way she held it stopped him cold. "Tell me," he said, his voice low and controlled, "what you think you know about justice." Emily's eyes blazed in the candlelight. "I know your father executed mine for treason he didn't commit. I know he fabricated evidence, bribed witnesses, and engineered a guilty verdict because he couldn't accept being refused." Refused? William's hand tightened on the doorframe. "By my mother." The words came out raw, jagged. "Your father wanted her. She chose mine. So he destroyed him and called it law. Lies. They had to be lies. His father had been stern, yes, uncompromising in matters of duty and honor. But judicial murder. Conspiracy. It was absurd. It was. The ring," William said abruptly. "Why does it matter to you?" Emily's expression crumbled for just a moment, grief breaking through rage. "Because it was my father's first. Before your father took everything else, he took this. A gift between friends, before friendship became betrayal." William felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd found the ring among his father's effects after the funeral, tucked in a locked drawer with no explanation. No record of its history. Just an old signet ring that bore the Hess seal but showed signs of where his father's other jewelry never had. He'd assumed it was a spare. an older version set aside when the current ducal ring was commissioned. But if it had been worn by someone else first? "You're lying," he said, but the conviction had already left his voice. "Am I?" Emily took a step toward him, still clutching the ring. "Then explain why it fits differently than yours. Why the engraving inside reads, 'For Thomas, in friendship eternal,' signed with your father's initials. Explain why a ring bearing your family seal would be given away, unless the man who gave it believed in something more than blood and titles." Thomas Winter. William had seen the name in old trial records, had skimmed past it while reviewing his father's legal legacy last winter. A treason case from 20 years ago. Quick verdict. Execution carried out within the month. He'd noted the efficiency, the decisiveness. He'd never questioned the justice. "You infiltrated my household," William said slowly, pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. "To steal evidence." "To find evidence," Emily corrected. "Evidence your father made sure would never see daylight. Evidence that would prove he murdered an innocent man and called it law." William stared at this woman, this stranger who'd served him tea, pressed his shirts, moved through his home like a ghost for half a year, and felt the ground beneath his inheritance begin to crack. "If what you claim is true," he said carefully, "then you've just confessed to conspiracy, fraud, and theft. I could have you arrested, tried, perhaps even executed." Emily's laugh was bitter. "Like father, like daughter? Would that close the circle for you, your grace? Would that preserve your family's precious legacy?" No. The word came out harder than he intended. William crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping directly in front of her, close enough to see the purple shadows beneath her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the way her hand trembled against her chest. "It would prove you right." Emily blinked. "What?" "If I silence you the way you claim my father silenced yours, I become exactly what you've accused him of being." William reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. He closed his hand over hers, over the hand still clutching the ring. "So instead, Miss Winter, you're going to tell me everything. And then we're going to find out the truth." "Why?" Suspicion and hope warred in her expression. "Why would you help me destroy your own father's legacy?" William's jaw tightened. "Because if he built that legacy on murder and lies, then it deserves to be destroyed." Emily had dreamed of this moment for 6 years. Confrontation. Exposure. The heir to the Hesse legacy forced to face the crimes of his bloodline. But in none of those dreams had the Duke offered alliance instead of punishment. In none of them had she seen grief in his eyes that mirrored her own. The story of how she'd arrived in this room, the ring pressed against her heart, the truth finally spoken aloud, began the night her father died. She was 12 years old when they came for him. The memory still lived in her body more than her mind. The crack of rifle butts against the door, her mother's scream, the way her father had turned from the dinner table with that terrible, resigned expression. Like he'd been expecting this. Like he'd known the sword was always going to fall. "Take Emily upstairs," he'd said quietly to her mother. "Don't let her see." But Emily had seen. Through the banister rails, pressed against the wall, she'd watched them drag Thomas Winter from their modest London townhouse in chains. Watched her father, a solicitor, a man who'd built his entire life on the principles of law and justice, treated like a common criminal. Treason against the crown, the lead officer had announced. Conspiracy to undermine the monarchy. Seditious correspondence with known radicals. All lies. Emily knew they were lies because she'd spent every evening of her childhood watching her father work. Watching him defend the poor, the forgotten, the ones the system had already condemned. He believed in the law the way some men believed in God, with absolute, unwavering faith that justice would prevail. That faith killed him. The trial lasted 3 days. The verdict was predetermined. Thomas Winter was executed on a cold March morning, hanged at Newgate Prison while a sparse crowd gathered to watch. Emily and her mother weren't allowed to attend. They learned of his death from a notice posted in the Times, buried on page 7 between advertisements for soap and upcoming theater performances. Her mother lasted 6 months. Grief, the doctor said. As if sorrow were a disease that could be diagnosed and catalogued. As if a broken heart could be reduced to medical terminology. Margaret Winter simply stopped. Stopped eating, stopped speaking, stopped existing in any meaningful way. She stared out their window at a street that no longer contained her husband, and slowly faded like a photograph left too long in sunlight. Emily was 13 when she became an orphan. 13 when the creditors came. 13 when she learned that justice was a luxury reserved for those who could afford it, and mercy was a myth told to keep the powerless compliant. The house was seized. The furniture sold. Everything her father had built, everything her mother had cherished, gone. Dispersed among strangers who'd never known the people who'd loved these objects, who'd filled them with meaning. Emily ended up in a workhouse in Southwark. The kind of place where children learned quickly that survival meant silence, that complaints were punished, and that the world didn't care whether you lived or died as long as you didn't make noise about it. She could have stayed there. Could have let the grinding machinery of poverty consume her the way it consumed thousands of other forgotten girls. Could have married some factory worker at 16, produced children she couldn't feed, and died young from exhaustion or disease or simple despair. But Emily had inherited something from her father that no creditor could seize: his meticulous mind, his ability to observe, document, and plan. And from her mother, she'd inherited a capacity for patience that bordered on supernatural. So she waited, learned, watched. By 15, she'd taught herself to read legal documents by stealing discarded newspapers from the barrister's district. By 16, she'd traced her father's case through public records, piecing together the timeline of his arrest, trial, and execution. By 17, she'd identified the name that appeared again and again in the margins of the case file. Duke Albert Hess, presiding magistrate. William's father. The man who'd signed the death warrant. Who'd expedited the trial. Who'd ensured that every legal avenue for appeal was blocked before Thomas Winter's defense could even organize. It took Emily another year to discover why. Another year of searching through old society pages, cross-referencing dates, tracking down elderly servants who remembered the scandal that never quite became public. Duke Albert Hess had pursued Margaret Whitmore before she became Margaret Winter, had courted her with the full weight of his title and fortune. And when she'd chosen a solicitor with principles over a duke with power, Albert had taken it as a personal betrayal. Thomas Winter's crime wasn't treason. His crime was winning the heart of a woman who'd rejected a Hess. Everything else, the fabricated evidence, the manufactured conspiracy, the execution, was just revenge dressed in legal robes. Emily spent 3 more years preparing, learning the skills a maid would need, fabricating references, creating a false identity so seamless that even the Hess household's notoriously thorough butler had hired her without question. 6 months she'd worked in this house. 6 months of pressing shirts, serving tea, cleaning rooms she wasn't supposed to enter. 6 months of searching for the evidence she knew existed somewhere in Duke William's inherited archives. She'd planned to be invisible, professional, perfectly forgettable. She'd never planned on stealing the ring. William listened to all of this with the stillness of a man watching his world systematically dismantled. He'd moved to the leather chair behind his desk, gesturing for Emily to sit in the one opposite. She'd remained standing, too wired with adrenaline and confession to settle. The ring now sat on the desk between them, gleaming in the candlelight like evidence at a trial. "My mother," William said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "You mentioned my father pursued her." "Margaret Whitmore," Emily confirmed. "Before she married my father. Your father courted her for nearly a year. Society expected an engagement. She refused him. I never heard this story." "No. You wouldn't have." Emily's laugh was hollow. "Your father made sure it was buried. Paid off the society columnists. Ensured no record remained. Can't have people knowing that a duke was rejected, can we? Bad for the legacy." William's fingers drummed once against the desk, then stilled. "You've been in my household for 6 months." "Yes." "Searching my father's papers." "Yes." "Finding anything?" The question caught Emily off guard. She'd expected denial, deflection, perhaps even rage. Not this cool, analytical interest that reminded her uncomfortably of her own father's approach to evidence. Fragments, she admitted. Your father was careful. But not perfect. There are inconsistencies in the trial records. Dates that don't align. Witness testimony that contradicts itself. And gaps, deliberate gaps, where documents should exist but don't. Absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. No, Emily agreed. But it's a starting point. And the ring, she gestured to it. That's not absence. That's proof that your father and mine knew each other. Were friends, even. The engraving is his handwriting. I've seen enough of his letters to recognize it. William reached for the ring, turning it slowly in the light. For Thomas in friendship eternal. He read the inscription aloud for the first time. My father kept this locked away. I found it after his death, assumed it was a family piece I didn't recognize. It was a friendship he wanted to forget. Or evidence he couldn't quite bring himself to destroy. William set the ring down again. His storm-gray eyes meeting hers directly. You understand what you're asking of me, Miss Winter? You're asking me to investigate my own father. To potentially prove that everything he built, everything I've inherited, was constructed on murder and lies. I'm not asking anything, Emily said, though her hands trembled at her sides. I came to find evidence myself. You caught me. Do what you will with that. What I will do, William said slowly, is offer you a choice. Emily's breath caught. Option 1. I summon my butler right now. Have you arrested for theft. You'll be tried, convicted, and sentenced before the week is out. Your claims about my father will be dismissed as the desperate lies of a caught criminal. You'll disappear into Newgate or be transported, and no one will ever hear your story. The words hung in the air like a blade. Option 2, William continued, his voice quieter now. You work with me. I give you supervised access to my father's archives. We investigate this together. If we find evidence supporting your claims, we pursue it. If we find nothing, then I've wasted your time and proven myself a liar. Then we revisit option 1. William leaned forward. But at least we'll know the truth. Emily stared at him, searching for the trap, for the angle. In her experience, powerful men didn't offer collaboration. They offered ultimatums disguised as choices. Why? She asked. Why would you do this? Because, William said, and for the first time she heard something raw beneath the aristocratic control, I've spent the last 6 months reviewing my father's legal cases. Not because I suspected anything. Just because I wanted to understand his legacy. The work he did. The decisions he made. He stood, moving to the window that overlooked the dark gardens. And I found inconsistencies. Cases that seemed rushed. Verdicts that didn't quite align with the evidence presented. Nothing conclusive. Nothing I could point to as proof of wrongdoing. Just doubts. William turned back to face her. You're offering me the chance to answer those doubts. To either validate my father's legacy or expose it. Either way, I need to know. And if exposing it destroys everything you have? Then perhaps, William said quietly, I never truly had it to begin with. The silence that followed was heavy with possibility. Emily could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. This wasn't how her plan was supposed to unfold. She was supposed to find the evidence herself, expose it anonymously. Watch the Hess legacy crumble from a safe distance. Working with William meant binding her fate to his. It meant trusting the son of the man who'd destroyed her family. It meant putting her freedom, possibly her life, in the hands of a duke who owed her nothing. But it also meant access to records she could never reach on her own. Resources she couldn't imagine. And perhaps most importantly, a witness who couldn't be dismissed as biased or vengeful. If we do this, Emily said carefully, I need your word that you won't suppress evidence. That if we find proof, then we expose it, William interrupted. Regardless of the consequences. You have my word. The word of a duke. Emily couldn't quite keep the bitterness from her voice. The word of a man, William corrected. who needs to know if his father was a murderer. Emily looked at the ring on the desk. Her father's ring. The symbol of a friendship that had ended in betrayal and blood. If she walked away now, chose arrest or escape, it would remain just that, a symbol. A relic of past injustice with no power to change the present. But if she stayed, supervised access, she said. What does that mean exactly? It means you work in the archive during set hours. Under observation. You can review any documents you need, but nothing leaves the room without my approval. And we discuss your findings together. So I'm a prisoner doing research. You're a collaborator, William corrected. With limited autonomy. Given that you've already committed theft and fraud, I think that's reasonable. Fair point. And if we find nothing? Emily pressed. If after weeks or months, there's no evidence to support my claims? Then I'll give you 2 days head start before I report the theft. William's expression was unreadable. Enough time to disappear if you're careful. And if we find proof, then we bring it to light. Publicly. Through the proper legal channels. William's jaw tightened. And I'll stand beside you when we do. Emily studied him. This man who should have been her enemy. Who by all rights should have had her arrested the moment he discovered her in his study. Instead, he was offering alliance. Partnership. A path forward she'd never imagined possible. She thought of her father, who'd believed in justice even as it killed him. Thought of her mother, who'd loved a good man and died for it. Thought of the 12-year-old girl who'd watched through the banister rails as her world was destroyed. That girl would have wanted revenge. Pure and absolute. But Emily was no longer that girl. I accept, she said. Option 2. Supervised access. Partnership. William nodded once, the gesture formal and binding. Then we start tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. I'll have the main archive prepared. The main archive? Emily frowned. I need access to your father's private records. The ones he kept separate. Those are in the estate's north wing. In his personal study. William's expression darkened slightly. I haven't opened that room since his death. Everything remains exactly as he left it. Then that's where we need to look. Tomorrow, William repeated firmly. It's nearly midnight, Miss Winter. You should rest. In the servants' quarters? The question came out more challenging than she'd intended. In the blue guest room on the 2nd floor, William corrected. If we're to work together, you can't remain in service. It would raise too many questions. So I'm no longer a maid. You were never a maid, William said quietly. You were a woman seeking justice. Starting tomorrow you'll be. He paused, considering. My research assistant. Helping to catalog my late father's legal documents. It's unusual but not unheard of. And your staff will believe this? My staff will accept what I tell them. William moved toward the door, then stopped. One more thing, Miss Winter. The ring. Do you want it back? Emily looked at the golden band gleaming on the desk. Part of her wanted to snatch it up, reclaim it as her father's. But another part, the part that was learning to think strategically rather than emotionally, recognized the risk. Keep it, she said. For now. If everything you've promised is a lie, I'll need proof I was here. That I told you the truth. And if it isn't. She met his eyes. Then eventually you'll give it back yourself. William picked up the ring, holding it for a moment before slipping it into his waistcoat pocket. Fair enough. He opened the door, gesturing for her to precede him into the hallway. As Emily stepped past him, she caught the faint scent of sandalwood and ink, the smell of old books and careful thought. Miss Winter, William said as they walked toward the grand staircase, their footsteps echoing in the silent house. Yes. Thank you for trusting me with the truth. I know you had no reason to. Emily almost laughed. I didn't trust you, Your Grace. You caught me red-handed. I had no choice. You could have lied, William pointed out. Invented some story about the ring. Most people would have. My father taught me that lies require more maintenance than truth, Emily said. Eventually they collapse under their own weight. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was. Emily's throat tightened. And your father made sure the world forgot that. They climbed the stairs in heavy silence. At the second-floor landing, William paused outside a door painted soft blue. Your room. I'll have fresh clothes sent up in the morning. Something appropriate for research work. Thank you. Emily hesitated at the threshold. Your Grace. Why are you really doing this? The truth. William was quiet for a long moment, his expression caught between shadows and lamplight. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made him seem older than his 28 years. Because if my father built his legacy on the bones of innocent men, then I've been living a lie my entire life, and I'd rather face an ugly truth than inherit a beautiful fiction. He met her eyes. Wouldn't you? Emily nodded slowly. Yes. I suppose I would. Then we have common ground. William inclined his head slightly. Good night, Miss Winter. 9 o'clock tomorrow. Don't be late. I won't. Emily watched him walk away down the corridor, his footsteps fading into the darkness. Then she stepped into the blue guest room and closed the door behind her. The space was larger than her entire family's townhouse had been before the creditors seized it. A 4-poster bed dominated the room, dressed in silk the color of robin's eggs. A writing desk sat beneath the window. Fresh flowers, orchids, bloomed in a crystal vase. Emily moved to the window and looked out over the Hess Estates gardens. Somewhere beyond those manicured hedges and marble fountains was the London she'd clawed her way through for 6 years. The workhouses and rookeries. The places where people like her father were forgotten and people like her simply disappeared. Tomorrow, she would walk into Duke Albert Hess's private archive. The room where he'd kept his secrets. The place where, if her instincts were right, the evidence of his crimes still waited to be discovered. She would do it under supervision, under guard, under the watchful eye of the dead man's son. But she would do it. Emily pressed her hand against the cool glass and whispered a promise to the ghosts who'd brought her here. I'm coming, Papa. We're going to prove what they did to you. And this time the truth is going to survive. Outside, the clock in the estate's tower struck midnight. The new day had begun. In 8 hours, Emily Winter would step into the archive that held the secrets of her father's death. And Duke William Hess would stand guard while she did. Emily stood at the threshold of Duke Albert Hess's private study at precisely 9 o'clock, dressed in a simple gray day dress that William's housekeeper had provided without comment or question. The room beyond stretched into shadows despite the morning light filtering through heavy velvet curtains. Shelves lined every wall from floor to ceiling, packed with leather-bound volumes, document boxes, and the accumulated paper trail of a man who'd wielded law like a weapon for 40 years. William stood beside her, a ring of keys in his hand. He'd been waiting when she descended the stairs, looking tired, like perhaps he'd slept as poorly as she had. My father was meticulous, he said, selecting a key and fitting it into the lock. Every case he presided over, every ruling he made, every piece of correspondence, he kept records of all of it, organized by year, then by case type. The lock clicked. The door swung inward. Where do we start? Emily asked, her voice steadier than she felt. 1806, William said. The year your father was tried and executed. March through May, if I remember correctly. He remembered correctly. Emily had the dates burned into her memory. Arrested March 3rd, trial concluded March 17th, execution carried out May 2nd. 59 days from arrest to death. Remarkably efficient for a treason case that should have taken months to prosecute. William led her to a section of shelving near the center of the room, running his finger along the spines until he found what he was seeking. Here. 1806. Criminal Proceedings. He pulled down 3 large document boxes, each one bearing his father's precise handwriting on the label. Everything from that year should be in these. He carried them to a massive oak table that dominated the center of the study, setting them down with care. Dust motes swirled in the lamplight. Emily noticed he'd already prepared the workspace. Fresh lamp oil, clean blotting paper, a magnifying glass, writing implements. "You'll work here," William said. "I'll be at my father's desk." He gestured to an imposing mahogany structure near the window, going through his personal correspondence from the same period. If there was anything irregular, it might appear there as well. "You're really going to help me destroy your father's legacy," Emily said. It wasn't quite a question. "I'm going to help us find the truth," William corrected. "What we do with it afterward." He paused. "That's a different matter." He moved to his position across the room, far enough to give her space but close enough that she remained under constant observation. A guard and a collaborator. The contradiction should have felt oppressive. Instead, it felt almost like protection. Emily opened the first box. The records were indeed meticulous. Painfully so. Duke Albert Hesse had documented every case that crossed his bench with the thoroughness of a man who believed history would judge him favorably. Each file contained the initial complaint, witness statements, evidence inventories, trial transcripts, sentencing documentation, and post-trial notes. Emily found her father's case in the second box, filed under Winter Thomas treason. Her hands trembled as she lifted the file folder. It was thicker than she'd expected. Hundreds of pages bound together with black ribbon. For a moment, she couldn't bring herself to open it. Inside this folder was the official record of how her father had been murdered by the state. The lies that had been dressed up as justice. The fabrications that had stolen him from the world. "Miss Winter." William's voice came from across the room, quiet with concern. "Do you need a moment?" "No." Emily forced herself to untie the ribbon. "I've waited 6 years for this. I don't need another moment." She opened the file. The first page was the formal arrest warrant, dated March 3, 1806. "Thomas Winter, Solicitor of London, is hereby charged with high treason against the Crown, specifically conspiracy to undermine the monarchy through seditious correspondence with known radical elements." Emily's father had been a solicitor who defended the poor. His radical elements had been laborers seeking fair wages and factory workers demanding safer conditions. He'd helped them file legal petitions. Perfectly legitimate, perfectly lawful petitions. She turned the page. The witness statements began on page 4. 3 men she'd never heard of, all claiming to have seen her father meeting with revolutionaries, discussing plans to destabilize the government, exchanging coded messages about overthrowing the natural order. Emily read them carefully, her legal training, self-taught though it was, noting inconsistencies. The statements were too similar. They used nearly identical phrasing in places, as if copying from the same source rather than recounting independent observations. She reached for the magnifying glass, examining the signatures. "Your Grace," she called across the room. "Could you come here, please?" William was at her side in moments. "What is it?" Emily pointed to the 3 witness signatures. "Look at these. The capital letters. The way the J in John curves. The specific slant of the M in Morrison." William leaned closer, studying them through the glass. His jaw tightened. "They're too similar." "They're identical," Emily corrected. "These weren't signed by 3 different men. This is the same hand attempting 3 different signatures. Someone forged these witness statements." She watched William's face carefully. This was the moment. The first real evidence that her claims weren't just grief-fueled conspiracy. If he was going to dismiss her findings, protect his father's reputation, it would happen now. Instead, William reached for the statements, examining them himself with the magnifying glass. He was silent for a long moment. "I need to check something," he said finally, moving back to his father's desk. He rummaged through a drawer, pulling out what looked like a ledger. "My father kept a record of witnesses who appeared in his courtroom. Names, addresses, occupations." He flipped through pages. If these 3 men existed, they should be listed here. Emily waited, her heart pounding. "John Morrison," William read. "Testified March 14, 1806. Listed occupation, dock worker. Address, Southwark." He looked up. "Except there's a notation here. Relocated to the Americas, address unknown." Convenient. The second witness. Emily prompted. Peter Hartley. Occupation. Tavern keeper. Address. Fleet Street. William's expression darkened. Notation. Deceased. Cholera. March 1807. Less than a year after the trial. And the third. James Wickham. No occupation listed. Address. William's voice went flat. No address listed. Just a dash. So 2 of your father's witnesses disappeared or died, and the third never existed at all, Emily said. And all 3 signatures were forged by the same person. We don't know who forged them, William cautioned, but there was no conviction in his objection. Don't we? Emily pulled out another document, the case summary, written in the judge's own hand. This is your father's handwriting, yes? William nodded. Emily placed it beside the witness statements. Look at the capital J in Justice here. Now look at the J in John on the witness signature. William stared at the documents for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. That's not conclusive. Many people form their letters similarly. Your Grace. I said it's not conclusive, William repeated, but he didn't move away from the table. Instead, he pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. What else is in the file? Emily turned the pages with careful fingers. The trial transcript came next, a record of 3 days of proceedings that had condemned her father. She skimmed the prosecution's case. Inflammatory language about threats to social order. References to the dangerous precedent of allowing the lower classes to challenge their betters. Assertions that Thomas Winter had corrupted the natural hierarchy. My father wasn't on trial for treason, Emily said quietly. He was on trial for believing that poor men deserved legal representation. That's not a crime, William said. Isn't it? When the judges and magistrates all come from the class being challenged. Emily met his eyes. Your father sat in that courtroom and saw a man who defended people who threatened the system that gave him power. Of course, he found him guilty. There's a difference between bias and murder. Is there? When the bias ends in a noose. William had no answer for that. They worked in tense silence for the next hour. Emily continued through the file while William cross-referenced names and dates against his father's personal records. The evidence accumulated like stones building a cairn. Witness statements that didn't align with the timeline, evidence that appeared without proper chain of custody, defense motions that were denied without explanation. And throughout it all, the glaring absence of certain documents. The defense should have submitted character witnesses, Emily said, breaking the silence. My father was well known in legal circles. Respected. There should be letters of support, testimony about his loyalty to the crown, something. Is there nothing? William asked. There's a notation that says, Defense Witness List, see attached. Emily held up the page. But there's no attachment. The pages are numbered consecutively. Nothing's missing from the binding. Whatever was attached was removed afterward. Or never existed. Or was destroyed, Emily countered. She flipped to the final section of the file, the sentencing documentation. Her father had been given no opportunity to speak in his own defense. No final statement recorded. Just the sentence, death by hanging to be carried out within 60 days. Duke Albert Hess had signed the order in his characteristic precise script. Emily traced the signature with one finger, feeling the slight indentation where the pen had pressed into the paper. This was the hand that had killed her father. These elegant, educated letters had condemned a good man to death. She looked up and found William watching her from across the table. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For what? For doubting you. Last night part of me still thought. He gestured helplessly. I wanted you to be wrong. And now I think my father orchestrated a murder and called it justice. William's voice was hollow. And I don't know how to live with that. They broke for lunch at 1:30. William sent for food to be brought to the study, a gesture Emily understood was meant to keep her away from the servants' hall, where her presence in a guest dress rather than a uniform would raise questions. The housekeeper, Mrs. Davies, arrived with the tray herself. She was a stern woman in her 50s who'd served the Hess family for 30 years. Her eyes swept over Emily with undisguised disapproval. "Your Grace," she said, setting the tray down with slightly more force than necessary. "The staff is asking questions about our guest." "The staff may direct their questions to me," William replied coolly. "Miss Winter is assisting with archival work. That's all they need to know." Archival work. Mrs. Davies's tone suggested she knew exactly what kind of work young women usually did in the private chambers of unmarried dukes. "Of course, Your Grace." "And shall I prepare the blue room for an extended stay?" The implication hung in the air like smoke. Emily felt her face heat. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but William spoke first. "You will prepare the blue room for as long as Miss Winter requires it," he said, his voice dropping into a register Emily hadn't heard before, aristocratic authority so absolute it didn't need volume. "And you will ensure the staff treats her with the same respect they would show any guest of this household. Is that clear, Mrs. Davies?" The housekeeper's spine stiffened. "Perfectly clear, Your Grace." "Excellent. That will be all." Mrs. Davies left with a curtsy that barely qualified as respectful. The door closed with a pointed click. Emily stared at William. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." William poured tea with careful precision. "You're under my protection while you're here. That means the staff's assumptions about your character or my intentions are irrelevant. You're a colleague. They'll treat you as such. I'm a former servant who's sleeping in a guest room and spending hours alone with you in your father's study," Emily pointed out. "Their assumptions aren't unreasonable." "Their assumptions are based on class prejudice," William countered. "The belief that a woman in your position must be here for inappropriate reasons because they can't imagine I'd value your mind over." He stopped, color rising in his cheeks. "They're wrong. That's all that matters." Emily took the teacup he offered, their fingers brushing briefly in the transfer. She pulled back quickly, but not before noticing the warmth of his hand, the careful way he'd ensured she wouldn't spill. "Thank you," she said quietly. They ate in silence. Cold chicken, cheese, fresh bread. Simple fare but elegantly presented. The contrast between this meal and the workhouse gruel Emily had survived on for years wasn't lost on her. Even now, partnered in investigation, the gulf between them remained vast. William seemed to sense her thoughts. "Tell me about your father," he said. "Beyond the case. What was he like?" Emily set down her teacup. "Why?" "Because everything I know about Thomas Winter comes from falsified court records. I'd like to know the real man." It was such a simple request. And yet it struck something deep in Emily's chest, the fact that someone was asking. That after 6 years of her father being reduced to a cautionary tale about treason, someone wanted to know him as a person. "He believed in the law," Emily said slowly. "Not as it was practiced, but as it could be. Should be. He used to tell me that justice was meant to protect the powerless from the powerful, not the other way around." "A radical philosophy," William observed. "Only if you're someone with power to lose." Emily smiled sadly. He defended everyone. Pickpockets and laborers. Mothers who stole bread to feed their children. Men who demanded fair wages. He didn't win every case. But he made sure everyone had a voice. The court system doesn't favor voices like that. No. It favors silence. Emily met William's eyes. "Your father understood that. That's why mine had to die." William flinched but didn't look away. "My father was." He paused, searching for words. Consumed by duty. By the belief that social order mattered more than individual lives. He believed the aristocracy had a responsibility to maintain structure, even when that structure was unjust. "And you?" Emily asked. "Do you believe that?" "I believed what I was taught," William said carefully. "That birth determined worth. That title meant wisdom. That our family's legacy was something sacred." He gestured to the documents spread across the table. "Now I'm learning that legacy was built on lies and corpses. So no, Miss Winter. I don't know what I believe anymore. The vulnerability in his admission made Emily's breath catch. This man, Duke, aristocrat, heir to everything her father had been denied, was grieving too. Not for her father, but for the illusion of his own. She understood that grief. Had lived inside it for 6 years. "I'm sorry," she said. William's laugh was bitter. "Don't be. You were right. And I was complicit in ignorance." He stood abruptly, moving back to his father's desk. "We should continue. The afternoon won't last forever." Emily returned to her documents, but her attention kept drifting to the man across the room. The way his shoulders carried tension like armor. The precise way he handled each paper, as if trying to impose order on chaos. The moment when he paused over a particular letter, his expression crumbling before he carefully, deliberately, rebuilt his composure. They were both haunted by Duke Albert Hesse, both searching through the wreckage he'd left behind. The difference was that Emily had known she was searching for ruins. William was only now discovering his inheritance was built on bones. At 4:30, William went very still. "Miss Winter." His voice was strange, tight and controlled. "I need you to look at something." Emily crossed the room. William had spread out 3 letters on the desk, positioning them side by side. They were written in different hands, addressed to Duke Albert Hesse from different people. But each one contained a notation in the margin, the same elegant script making brief comments. "Disposed of as discussed. Payment delivered. Witness has agreed to leave London. Final sum enclosed. Statement prepared per your specifications." "These are dated between February and March 1806, William said quietly. "The month before your father's arrest." Emily leaned closer, reading the letters themselves. They were innocuous on the surface, requests for legal consultation, questions about court procedures, business correspondence. But the marginal notes told a different story. He was arranging it, Emily breathed. Paying witnesses to leave. Having statements prepared before there was even a crime to investigate. "This one," William pointed to the middle letter, "is from a court clerk named Harrison. He's asking about proper documentation for witness testimony. My father's note says, 'Statement prepared per your specifications.'" "Harrison prepared the forged statements," Emily said. "On my father's orders." William's hands were shaking now. "This isn't bias or judicial overreach. This is premeditated murder." Emily stared at the letters. Evidence. Real, tangible evidence that Duke Albert Hesse had engineered her father's execution weeks before Thomas Winter had even been arrested. This was what she'd come for. What she'd spent 6 years preparing to find. So why did she feel no triumph? Only a crushing weight of confirmed horror? "We need to document this," she said, her voice mechanical. "Cross-reference the dates with the trial records. Trace the payments. Build a timeline that shows clear intent." "Emily." William used her first name without seeming to notice. "This is enough. This proves your father was innocent. That mine was guilty of murder. Proof for us," Emily corrected. "But for anyone else? For a court. We need more than margin notes and missing witnesses. We need something irrefutable. What could be more irrefutable than this?" Emily met his eyes. "Your father's confession. His own words admitting what he did and why. He's dead. We'll never find that." "Maybe." Emily turned back to the shelves lining the room. "Or maybe a man consumed by duty kept records of everything. Even his crimes. You think he documented his own murder conspiracy?" "I think," Emily said slowly, "that men who believe they're above justice often keep trophies of their power. And your father believed he was untouchable." William stared at the shelves. Hundreds of boxes, thousands of documents, a lifetime of judicial work. Somewhere in this archive, if Emily's instincts were right, was the final piece of evidence they needed. Not just proof that Duke Albert Hesse had orchestrated an execution, but proof of why. "We keep looking," William said finally. He sounded exhausted, defeated, but determined. "Tomorrow, we go through his personal correspondence. Every letter, every note, everything." "Your Grace." William, he interrupted. "If we're going to destroy my family's legacy together, you might as well call me by my name." Emily nodded slowly. "William." The sound of his name in her voice seemed to startle them both. The intimacy of it. The crossing of another line between servant and duke, accuser and defender, enemy and... What were they now? William cleared his throat. "It's nearly evening. You should rest. We'll start again tomorrow at 9. Emily gathered the documents they'd been reviewing, organizing them back into careful stacks. Her father's case file lay open on the table, revealing all the ways he'd been systematically destroyed. "Emily," William said as she reached the door. She turned. He was standing by his father's desk, surrounded by evidence of patricide, the deliberate murder of everything a son was supposed to honor. "I meant what I said last night. When we find the final proof, and we will find it, I'll stand with you. No matter what it costs." "It will cost you everything," Emily said. "I know." William's smile was sad. "But some legacies don't deserve to survive." Emily left him there, alone among his father's lies. As she climbed the stairs to the blue guest room, she thought about justice and revenge, inheritance and truth. About how sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was destroy what they'd been taught to protect. Tomorrow they would return to the archive. Tomorrow they would search for the final piece of evidence, the one that would prove beyond all doubt that Duke Albert Hesse had committed judicial murder. Tomorrow they would take another step toward a reckoning 6 years in the making. But tonight, Emily stood at her window and thought about the man working late in his father's study, surrounded by proof that everything he'd believed was a lie. And she wondered when exactly she'd stopped seeing William Hesse as her enemy and started seeing him as the only person in the world who understood what it meant to have your foundation stolen by truth. The archive of lies was opening, and they were both about to discover that some evidence, once found, can never be forgotten. Emily arrived at the archive that morning to discover William already there, still wearing yesterday's clothes. His cravat hung loose, his hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it for hours. Empty teacups littered his father's desk alongside stacks of correspondence he'd clearly been reading through the night. "Have you slept at all?" Emily asked from the doorway. William looked up, haunted. "I found something. Last night after you retired. I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, about men keeping trophies of their power." He gestured to a forced-open drawer, wood splintered around the mechanism. He had a private collection. Personal correspondence he didn't file with the rest. Letters he kept hidden. Emily moved closer, pulse quickening. Letters from whom? "From himself," William said quietly. "To your mother." The words hung like a death knell. Unsent letters. Written over 2 years. 1804 to 1806. He never mailed them. Just wrote them and locked them away. He picked up a page with revulsion. "I've been reading them all night. Emily, there. The writings of a madman." Emily's hands trembled as she reached for the nearest letter. April 1804. 2 years before her father's arrest. Duke Albert Hesse's precise script, but the content made her stomach turn. "My dearest Margaret, another week has passed without word from you. You are punishing me for my honesty, for the ardor of my affection. You believe yourself suited to that solicitor, that common man who cannot possibly understand the refinement of your nature as I do. I dream of you nightly. Your face haunts my waking hours. This obsession is beneath my station, yet I cannot master it. You will come to understand that we are meant for one another. Time will prove what reason cannot convince you of now. Yours in perpetual devotion, Albert." He was obsessed with her, Emily whispered. "That's the first one," William said grimly. "They get worse." The next letter was dated 6 months later, the handwriting less controlled, letters slanting dramatically. "Margaret, I saw you today at the market with him. You smiled at him while I stood not 20 feet away, invisible to you. Do you know what that does to a man of my position? He is poison to you. He fills your head with dangerous ideas about equality and justice for the undeserving masses. This cannot stand. Something must be done." "Something must be done," Emily repeated, voice barely a whisper. October 1804. They married in December. Keep reading, William said. January 1805. 1 month after her parents' wedding. The handwriting had deteriorated further, harsh and angular. You are married to him now. I watched from a distance, unable to intervene. You knew what you were doing when you chose him over me. I will not forget this, Margaret. I will not forgive it. He has taken what is mine by right of station and worth. But thieves always face justice eventually. And I am nothing if not a servant of justice. Your husband will learn what it means to take from a Hess. Emily's vision blurred. He threatened my father. A year before the arrest. There are 43 letters in total, William said. They document a complete descent into obsession and revenge. He pulled out a letter from March 1806. Read this one. Margaret, by the time you read this, though you never will, your husband will be gone. Arrested. Tried. Executed. The machinery is already in motion. Harrison has prepared the witness statements. Morrison and the others have been paid to disappear. The evidence of treason has been carefully constructed. Thomas Winter will hang for the crime of stealing you from me. You will never know that I orchestrated every moment of his destruction, that I transformed my broken heart into legal proceedings and called it righteousness. After a proper mourning period, when you are vulnerable and alone, I will offer comfort. You will come to depend on me. This is not revenge, Margaret. This is correction. I am simply restoring the natural order that your misguided heart disrupted. The letter slipped from Emily's fingers. She couldn't breathe. Her father hadn't died for treason. He died because a duke couldn't accept rejection. He wrote this a week before my father's arrest, Emily said distantly. He planned everything. The charges, the witnesses, the verdict, all deliberate. And my mother never knew. She spent 6 months grieving, thinking it was fate. Then she died believing the world had simply been cruel. Emily. Are there more? William handed her the final letter, dated May 1806. Her father's execution date. Margaret. It is done. Thomas Winter died this morning on the gallows at Newgate. Justice has been served. I waited for relief. For satisfaction. For peace. Instead I feel only emptiness. You have not turned to me in your grief. You have withdrawn entirely. And now I learn you are ill. Wasting away. Dying of a broken heart. This was not supposed to happen. You were supposed to grieve, then recover. You were supposed to need me. Instead you are choosing to die with him rather than live for me. I have destroyed the man I hated and lost the woman I loved, and I am beginning to understand that this is what damnation feels like. Emily's cheeks were wet. She died in November. 6 months after this letter. Your father killed my father, and the grief killed my mother. He destroyed both of them. Emily looked at William through her tears. And then he kept these letters like what? Mementos. They stood in silence, letters spread between them like evidence at a trial. William, Emily said carefully, these letters are evidence of premeditation. Combined with what we found, this proves beyond any doubt that your father committed deliberate, calculated murder. I know. If we make this public, when we make this public, your family's name will be destroyed. Every case your father presided over will be questioned. You will be known as the son of a killer who perverted justice itself. I know, William repeated. You will lose everything. Your reputation. Your standing in society. Possibly even your title. Everything you've inherited, everything you are, it will all collapse. Emily. William finally looked at her directly, and what she saw made her breath catch. Not fear. Not denial. But terrible, absolute certainty. I know. He moved to the window, staring at the manicured gardens representing generations of Hess wealth and power. I've spent the last 3 days watching you piece together evidence of my father's crimes with the precision of a trained investigator rather than a grieving daughter. Do you know what I've learned? Emily shook her head. That you're stronger than I am. Braver. Because you've been carrying this truth for 6 years while I've been living comfortably in ignorance, believing my inheritance was earned rather than stolen. William turned to face her. 3 days ago I was a duke, proud of my name, confident in my legacy. Now I'm the son of a murderer, an obsessive madman who killed an innocent man out of jealousy and called it law. You didn't know, Emily said. Does that absolve me? I benefited from his crimes. Every comfort I've enjoyed, it was all built on your father's corpse and your mother's broken heart. William's hands clenched. I've been asking myself what a good man would do, what honor demands, what justice requires. And what did you decide? That there's only one honorable choice, William said. We expose everything. We bring these letters, the forged statements, the margin notes, all of it, into the light. We clear your father's name. We destroy mine. And we let justice finally be served, even if it's 20 years too late. Emily stared at him. You're serious. Completely. William, you're talking about social suicide, political destruction, the end of everything you've ever known. Yes. He crossed the room until he stood directly before her. But the alternative is silence. Complicity. Becoming exactly what my father was, someone who values legacy more than truth. You have a choice, Emily said. You could burn these letters right now. Destroy the evidence. No one would ever know. I would know. William's voice was fierce. I would spend the rest of my life knowing I chose comfort over justice. That I protected a murderer's reputation because he happened to be my father. That I valued my inheritance more than the truth. I can't do that, Emily. I won't. Even if it costs you everything. Especially then. William's hand almost touched her shoulder before dropping back. Because if I'm not willing to sacrifice for justice, then what am I? Just another aristocrat who believes his blood makes him above accountability. Just another man who thinks legacy matters more than lives. Emily felt something shift in her chest. For 6 years, the Hesse heir had been an enemy to defeat. She'd never considered he might become an ally. A partner in truth. A friend. You're going to lose everything, she said again, softer. Then I'll lose it honestly. William met her eyes. My father built his legacy on lies and corpses. I'd rather have nothing than inherit that. The silence stretched, heavy with what they were about to do. There's still time, Emily said quietly. If you want to protect yourself. I don't want to protect myself, William said. I want to do what's right, even if it destroys me. He picked up the letters, gathering them with careful hands. These need to be catalogued, organized chronologically so the progression of his obsession is clear. We'll need affidavits from handwriting experts, legal documentation proving they weren't fabricated after his death. You've thought about this. The logistics. I've thought about nothing else for 12 hours, William admitted. Once we go public, there will be questions. Accusations that we're lying, that the evidence is forged, that I'm being manipulated or you're seeking revenge. We need everything to be absolutely irrefutable. So we build a case, Emily said, understanding. Not just evidence of your father's crime, but proof so comprehensive that no one can dismiss it. Exactly. It will take time. Weeks, possibly months. We'll cross-reference everything, trace every payment, account for every witness. And during that time we keep working. Together. Together, William confirmed. They stood in the archive, surrounded by evidence of murder and obsession, and Emily realized she trusted this man. Trusted him to keep his word, to follow through, to stand beside her when the reckoning came. William Hesse was choosing justice over blood, honor over legacy, truth over everything he'd been raised to protect. And Emily Winter was no longer alone. We're really doing this, Emily said. Not a question. We're really doing this, William confirmed. No turning back. No turning back. He looked at her, and something in his expression made Emily's heart stutter. Respect. Partnership. But also something deeper neither was ready to name. Whatever comes next, Emily, We face it together. As Emily left that evening, she carried the weight of confession letters and the unexpected lightness of partnership. Behind her, William remained among his father's papers, dismantling a legacy one document at a time. The Duke had chosen truth, and in doing so, he'd lost everything except the one thing that mattered: his honor. Tomorrow, they would begin the final phase of their investigation. Tonight, they would both lie awake, thinking not of evidence or justice, but of the person working beside them in the archive. The person who understood what it meant to sacrifice everything for what was right. The inheritance Duke William Hesse would carry forward wasn't his father's legacy. It was the choice to be better than the man who'd raised him. And that, Emily was beginning to realize, was worth more than any title. The smoking gun arrived in the form of a sealed envelope tucked inside Duke Albert Hesse's personal ledger. Emily found it on the 7th day of their investigation, buried between pages recording household expenses from March 1806. The envelope was unmarked, the seal long since broken, and when she carefully extracted the letter inside, her hands went numb. "William," she said, her voice strange even to her own ears, "you need to see this." He was beside her in seconds. They developed a rhythm over the past week, working in parallel, calling each other over for discoveries, building their case piece by careful piece. But something in Emily's tone made William's expression shift from curiosity to alarm. Emily laid the letter on the desk between them. It was addressed to Harrison, the court clerk who'd prepared the forged witness statements. And it was written in Duke Albert Hesse's own hand. Harrison. Enclosed you will find payment in full for services rendered regarding the Winter matter. £500, as agreed, £200 for the preparation of witness statements, £300 for ensuring no complications arise during trial proceedings. I trust you understand the delicacy of this arrangement. Thomas Winter must be convicted of treason. The evidence must be irrefutable, the verdict swift, and the sentence carried out without delay. Any suggestion of irregularity would be unfortunate for both of us. The witness Morrison has been paid to relocate to the Americas. Hartley will receive additional compensation to disappear after testimony. Wickham, as you know, is a fictional creation, but his statement must be as convincing as the others. Winter believes the law will protect him. He is wrong. The law is what I say it is. And I say he is guilty. This is not merely about justice, Harrison. This is about correction. Thomas Winter took something that belonged to me by right of station and worth. He corrupted a woman of quality with his pedestrian ideals about equality and justice for the undeserving. He made her believe love could transcend class, that happiness could exist in poverty. He was wrong. And he will die for that error. Destroy this letter after reading. Our arrangement must remain confidential. But know that you have my gratitude, and my assurance that your cooperation in this matter will be rewarded with future considerations. The silence
Duke
that
Albert
followed
Hesse
was
March 8th,
absolute.
1806.
Emily read the letter 3 times, her vision blurring, her chest tight with something too large to name. This wasn't margin notes or unsent confessions. This was direct, explicit evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. Payment records. Acknowledgement of fabricated witnesses. Clear statement of motive and intent. He kept it, she whispered. Harrison was supposed to destroy it, but he kept it. And somehow it ended up back in your father's possession. Insurance, William said flatly. Harrison kept it as leverage. And when he died, he checked the ledger's dates. 1809. 3 years after the trial. My father must have retrieved it from his effects. And instead of burning it, he kept it himself. Emily looked up at William. Why would he do that? William's expression was hollow. Because he was proud of it. Because destroying your father wasn't just revenge. It was an achievement. Proof that he could manipulate the entire justice system and get away with it. Emily's hands trembled as she touched the letter. This is it. This is everything we need. Explicit admission of bribery. Fabricated evidence. Premeditated murder. He even admits his motive, that my father took something that belonged to him. Her voice cracked. My mother. He killed my father over a woman who chose someone else. Emily. 6 years, Emily said. her grief finally transforming into something crystalline and absolute. 6 years I've searched for proof. 6 years I've carried the weight of knowing my father was innocent while the world believed him a traitor. And here it is. In his murderer's own handwriting. Confessing everything. She looked at William, and for the first time since entering this archive, she felt the burden begin to lift. Not the pain that would never fully leave, but the terrible isolation of being the only person who knew the truth. "We have him," she said. "We finally have him." William picked up the letter, reading it again with an expression Emily couldn't decipher. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but certain. "This changes everything." The margin notes and unsent letters could be explained away as a disturbed man's private writings. But this. He held up the letter. "This is a direct confession to conspiracy and judicial murder. Written to a court clerk. Documenting payment for fabricated evidence. There's no ambiguity here. No room for interpretation. And it proves premeditation," Emily added. "Dated 5 days before my father's arrest. He planned the entire thing, then executed it exactly as described." William set the letter down carefully, as if it might shatter. "Once we make this public, there's no controlling the outcome. It won't just destroy my father's reputation. Every case he presided over will be questioned. Convictions will be appealed. The entire judicial system will be implicated for allowing this to happen under their watch." "Good," Emily said fiercely. "If the system protected a murderer, it deserves to be questioned." "I agree." William met her eyes. "But you need to understand what you're asking for. This will become a scandal that consumes everything in its path. You'll be thrust into public view. Questioned. Scrutinized. People will dig into your past, your mother's past, looking for any detail they can use to discredit you." "Let them," Emily said. "I've lived 6 years with nothing. I can survive their scrutiny. And I'll stand beside you when they come." William's voice held an edge of steel Emily hadn't heard before. "Every question they ask you, they'll have to ask me as well. Every attempt to discredit this evidence, they'll have to explain why I, the Duke's own son, am presenting it." Emily studied his face. The exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes. The tension in his jaw. The way his hands rested flat on the desk as if bracing against an earthquake only he could feel. "Are you certain?" she asked quietly. "Once we do this, there's no going back. Your father's crimes become your burden. His shame becomes your inheritance." "His shame was always my inheritance," William said. "I just didn't know it until now." He straightened, and Emily watched him transform before her eyes. Not into the uncertain man who'd been questioning his legacy, but into someone who'd made a decision and would see it through regardless of cost. "We go to Parliament. Next week. I'll request a formal inquiry into my father's conduct as a magistrate." "They'll resist." "Of course they will. My father sat in the House of Lords for 30 years. He had allies. Friends. People who benefited from his influence and won't want to admit they served alongside a murderer." William's smile was bitter. "But I have something they don't." "What's that?" "The truth. And a willingness to destroy my own legacy to prove it." He picked up the letter again. "This is irrefutable, Emily. They can question our motives, our methods, even our sanity. But they can't dispute documentary evidence in my father's own hand, authenticated by his personal seal, documenting a conspiracy to commit judicial murder." Emily felt something shift in her chest. For 6 years, justice had been an abstract concept, something she pursued alone, unsure if she'd ever reach it. But standing here with William, watching him methodically plan the exposure of his own father's crimes, she finally understood what her father had believed about the law. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't always fair. But when wielded by people who cared more about truth than power, it could still be a weapon for the powerless. "When we stand before Parliament," Emily said slowly, "and you present this evidence, you understand they'll turn on you. Your peers. The people who've known you your entire life. They'll call you traitor to your own blood. Better a traitor to corrupt blood than complicit in its corruption," William said. Their eyes met across the desk, and Emily felt the weight of what they'd built over the past 7 days. Not just a case, but a partnership forged in shared grief and common purpose. They'd started as enemies, victim and beneficiary, accuser and defender. But somewhere in the careful examination of evidence, in the late nights and early mornings spent piecing together truth, they'd become something else. Allies. Partners. Two people who'd chosen justice over everything else they could have been. "I couldn't have done this without you," Emily said quietly. "Yes, you could have," William corrected. "You'd already spent 6 years preparing. You infiltrated my household, gained my trust, searched for evidence, all on your own. You're the strongest person I've ever met, Emily Winter." The use of her full name, spoken with such certainty, made Emily's breath catch. "But," William continued, "I'm grateful you don't have to do the rest alone. Whatever comes next, the inquiry, the scandal, the reckoning, we face it together." Emily nodded, not trusting her voice. William began organizing their evidence into a master file. The forged witness statements, the margin notes documenting payments, the unsent letters revealing obsession, and finally, this smoking gun that proved premeditated murder beyond any doubt. "We'll need affidavits from handwriting experts," he said, falling into the methodical planning that had become their shared language. "Documentation proving these documents weren't fabricated. Witnesses who can testify to my father's state of mind, his relationships, his access to court proceedings." "I can find character witnesses for my father," Emily offered. "People who knew him, who can testify to his loyalty and integrity." "Good." William made notes in his precise handwriting. "We'll present both sides, proof of the crime and proof of your father's innocence. Make it impossible for them to dismiss this as a personal vendetta." They worked through the afternoon, building the framework for their public revelation. As the light faded outside, Emily watched William prepare to indict his own father, to stand before his peers and demand accountability for crimes committed in the name of justice. And she understood, finally, what honor looked like when stripped of title and inheritance. It looked like William Hess, choosing truth over legacy. It looked like courage in the face of certain ruin. "Next week," William said as they prepared to leave the archive for the evening. He held the smoking gun letter carefully, as if it were both precious and poisonous. "Next week, we go to Parliament. And I formally request an inquiry into Duke Albert Hess's conduct as presiding magistrate." "Your father's house will fall," Emily warned. "It was built on corpses," William said simply. "It deserves to fall." They stood together in the gathering darkness, surrounded by evidence of murder and obsession, and Emily realized that somewhere in the past 7 days, she'd stopped seeing William as the son of her father's killer. Now she saw him as the man who'd chosen justice over blood, who'd sacrificed everything to stand beside her, who was about to indict his own father for murder. The letter that would destroy a house lay between them, and together they would watch it burn. The rumors started before William even submitted his formal request. Emily first heard them from Mrs. Davies, who delivered the news with barely concealed satisfaction over breakfast 3 days after they'd found the smoking gun letter. "They're saying the Duke has gone mad," the housekeeper announced, setting down the tea service with more force than necessary. "That he's been bewitched by a former servant girl who's convinced him to betray his own blood." Emily's hand stilled on her teacup. "Who is saying this?" "Everyone, Miss Winter." Mrs. Davies's smile was thin. "Lord Ashford visited yesterday while you were in the archive. He warned His Grace that pursuing this investigation would ruin him socially. That decent society wouldn't tolerate a duke who turned against his own father's memory." And what did His Grace say? That decent society had tolerated far worse. Mrs. Davies sniffed. "He showed Lord Ashford the door. They'd been friends since childhood." Emily found William in the archive an hour later, staring at 3 letters that had been delivered that morning. His face was pale, his jaw tight. "They know," he said without preamble. "About the inquiry request. About the evidence. Someone in the parliamentary office is leaking information." "How bad is it?" William handed her the first letter. It was from the Duke of Marlborough, a man who'd served alongside William's father in the House of Lords. Your actions are a disgrace to your name and station. To publicly question your late father's integrity is an act of betrayal that will not be forgiven. Withdraw your inquiry request immediately, or face the consequences of your treachery. The second letter was from Lady Catherine Hesse, William's aunt. You have brought shame upon this family. Whatever that woman has told you, it is lies meant to destroy us. Send her away before she ruins what remains of our legacy. Your father was a great man. You dishonor his memory with this farce. The third letter was unsigned, but its message was clear. Accidents happen to those who ask too many questions, and to those who encourage them. Emily's blood ran cold. That's a threat. Against both of us. William took the letters back, his hand steady despite the fury Emily could see simmering beneath his controlled exterior. They're trying to intimidate us into silence. Will it work? William's laugh was harsh. They just threatened you. Do they really think that would make me back down? He moved to his desk, pulling out fresh parchment. I'm accelerating the timeline. The formal inquiry request goes to Parliament today, not next week, before they have time to organize opposition. William, if we don't rush this, they'll find a way to bury it before it ever sees daylight. William began writing with fierce precision. The evidence is ready. The documentation is irrefutable. We present it now, or we risk losing the opportunity entirely. Emily understood. Power was turning on itself, and the aristocracy was closing ranks to protect one of their own, even a dead one. Especially a dead one, because admitting Duke Albert Hesse had committed judicial murder meant admitting the entire system had failed. The rumors intensified over the next 2 days. Emily heard them everywhere, in whispers from servants, in pointed stares when she accompanied William to his solicitor's office, in the way people crossed the street to avoid them. The Winter Woman has seduced the young Duke. He's destroying his father's legacy for a commoner. She's probably blackmailing him. This is what happens when nobility forgets its place. William ignored them all, his focus absolute as he prepared their case. But Emily felt each whisper like a blade. She'd expected resistance, but not this coordinated campaign to discredit her before they'd even presented their evidence. The crisis came on the third day, when Emily returned from posting letters to her father's old colleagues, potential character witnesses for the inquiry. She was halfway up the steps to William's townhouse when 2 constables appeared on either side of her. Emily Winter. The taller one asked. Yes. You're under arrest for theft, fraud, and conspiracy to defame a peer of the realm. Emily's heart stopped. On whose authority? Lord Chancellor's office. The constable produced iron shackles. You're accused of stealing documents from the Hesse estate and fabricating evidence against the late Duke Albert Hesse. That's absurd. Save it for the magistrate. His hand closed around her arm. Take your hands off her. William's voice cut through the street like a whip. He stood in the doorway of his townhouse, his expression colder than Emily had ever seen it. Your Grace. The constables shifted uncomfortably. We have orders. I don't care what orders you have. William descended the steps slowly, deliberately. Miss Winter is under my protection. She has taken nothing that wasn't freely given. She has fabricated nothing. I have personally authenticated every document in our possession. And if you attempt to arrest her, you'll be arresting the Duke of Hesse's official research assistant on fabricated charges. The Lord Chancellor can take his concerns directly to me. William positioned himself between Emily and the constables. Miss Winter is not leaving this house in shackles. If the Lord Chancellor wishes to question her, he can submit a formal request through my solicitor. Until then, she remains under my protection as a guest in my home. The constables exchanged glances. They were caught between orders from the Lord Chancellor and direct opposition from a duke. Finally, the taller one stepped back. We'll report this to our superiors. You do that, William said coldly. And tell them that if they want to silence Miss Winter, they'll have to go through me first. The constables left. William waited until they disappeared around the corner before turning to Emily, his controlled facade cracking. Are you hurt? No, Emily's voice shook. They were going to arrest me. Lock me away before we could present the evidence. I know. William's hands clenched at his sides, as if fighting the urge to reach for her. This is Ashford's work. Or Marlborough's. They're trying to eliminate you before the inquiry even begins. By making me look like a criminal fabricating evidence. Yes. William's jaw tightened. Which means we're scaring them. They wouldn't bother trying to silence you if they thought the evidence was weak. Emily looked at him, this man who just publicly defended her against his own peers, who'd placed himself between her and arrest, who'd declared her under his protection in front of witnesses who would spread the story across London by nightfall. You just made yourself a target, she said quietly. I was already a target the moment I requested the inquiry. William met her eyes. But they've made a mistake, Emily. By trying to arrest you, they've shown their hand. They're not fighting the evidence. They're fighting to keep it from being heard. And that tells me everything I need to know about how damning it really is. What do we do now? We go on the offensive. William gestured toward the house. I've called a meeting with my solicitor. We're submitting the inquiry request today, along with a formal complaint about the attempted arrest. If they want to play politics, we'll force this into the open where they can't hide. They worked through the afternoon, finalizing documents and preparing statements. William's solicitor, a sharp-eyed man named Pemberton, reviewed their evidence with increasing alarm. Your Grace, he said carefully, you understand what you're doing? This will destroy your father's reputation, your family's standing, possibly your own future in the House of Lords. I understand perfectly, William said. And you're certain the evidence is authentic? I found most of it myself, in my father's own archive. William's voice was steady. It's authentic. And it's damning. Pemberton nodded slowly. Then God help us all when this becomes public. The answer came faster than expected. By evening, a messenger arrived with an official summons bearing the parliamentary seal. William broke it open, scanning the contents. His expression shifted from grim determination to something almost like satisfaction. What is it? Emily asked. Parliament has agreed to hear the inquiry. William looked up, and Emily saw the weight of what they'd set in motion settling across his shoulders. Emergency session. 3 days from now. We present our evidence before the full House of Lords. They agreed that quickly? They didn't have a choice. I invoked a rarely used provision, a peer's right to request investigation of judicial misconduct by another peer, even posthumously. They have to hear it. William set down the summons. But they'll fight us every step of the way. Every lord who ever served with my father, everyone who benefited from his influence, everyone who fears what this investigation might expose about the system itself. Emily moved to stand beside him, looking down at the official summons that would bring their evidence into the light. 3 days. 3 days, William confirmed. He turned to face her, and for a moment, something vulnerable flickered in his expression. Emily, I need you to know. Your Grace. Pemberton's voice cut through from the doorway. Forgive the interruption, but there are reporters gathering outside. Word has spread about the parliamentary session. William's jaw tightened. The moment passed, whatever he'd been about to say lost. Let them gather, he said finally. They'll have their story soon enough. That night, Emily stood at her window watching lamplight flicker across London's rooftops. Somewhere in the city, powerful men were strategizing how to bury the truth, how to discredit her, how to save Duke Albert Hesse's reputation and, by extension, their own complicity in a system that had allowed judicial murder to go unchallenged for 20 years. But in 3 days, she and William would stand before Parliament. They would present irrefutable evidence of conspiracy and murder. And they would watch as power finally turned on itself. A knock at her door made her turn. William stood in the hallway, still dressed, looking as if he hadn't slept. I wanted to make sure you were all right, he said. After the arrest attempt. I'm fine. Thanks to you. William nodded, but didn't move to leave. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. "Emily," he said finally, "whatever happens in that parliamentary chamber—" "3 days," Emily interrupted gently, understanding what he wasn't saying. "We'll talk after. When it's done." William's expression was grateful. After. Yes. He left, and Emily returned to her window. 3 days until Parliament. 3 days until justice. 3 days until everything they'd built toward came to fruition or fell apart. The city below held its breath. And in the Hess townhouse, 2 people waited for the reckoning that would change everything. The chamber of the House of Lords had never felt so vast or so hostile. Emily sat in the gallery reserved for witnesses, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. Below her, the peers of the realm filled their benches, a sea of ermine-trimmed robes and ancestral privilege. Every eye in the room tracked William as he stood at the presenter's podium, a leather portfolio containing their evidence resting before him. Lord Chancellor Pembroke presided from the elevated throne, his expression already skeptical. The House recognizes Duke William Hess, who has invoked the ancient right of posthumous inquiry. Your Grace, you may present your petition. William's voice, when he spoke, carried clearly through the vaulted chamber. My lords, I come before you today to request a formal investigation into judicial misconduct by my late father, Duke Albert Hess, during his tenure as presiding magistrate. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Emily saw Lord Ashford lean forward, his face dark with anger. Specifically, William continued, I present evidence that my father orchestrated the wrongful conviction and execution of Thomas Winter, Solicitor of London, on fabricated charges of treason in March of 1806. The murmur became a rumble of outrage. Preposterous! Someone shouted from the back benches. Lord Chancellor Pembroke raised his hand for silence. Your Grace, these are serious accusations against a distinguished servant of the Crown. I trust you have substantial evidence to support such claims. I have my father's confession, William said simply. In his own hand. The chamber went silent. William opened the portfolio, removing the first document. I submit for the record a letter dated March 8, 1806, written by Duke Albert Hess to Court Clerk James Harrison. In it, my father explicitly details payment for fabricated witness statements, acknowledges that a key witness is entirely fictional, and states his intention to convict Thomas Winter not for treason, but for what he termed correction of a personal slight. He held up the letter so the assembly could see the Hess seal, unmistakable even from a distance. The letter describes a payment of £500, 200 for preparation of false testimony, 300 to ensure no complications during trial. It names the witnesses Morrison, Hartley, and Wickham. It acknowledges that Wickham never existed. And it states clearly, Thomas Winter took something that belonged to me by right of station and worth. He will die for that error. Lord Marlborough stood abruptly. This is absurd. Anyone could have forged such a document. Which is why, William interrupted smoothly, I have brought testimony from 3 independent handwriting experts, all of whom have authenticated this letter and 17 others as genuine products of my father's hand. I also submit the original trial records, which show witness testimony from Morrison, Hartley, and Wickham. Statements that forensic analysis proves were written by the same person attempting 3 different hands. He placed document after document on the presentation table. Emily watched the faces in the chamber shift from outrage to uncertainty to dawning horror. The witness Morrison, William continued, his voice steady and relentless, was paid to relocate to America immediately after the trial. Hartley died of convenient cholera less than a year later. Wickham, as stated in my father's own letter, never existed at all. Their signatures on the witness statements are forgeries, and the forger was my father himself. Your Grace, Lord Chancellor Pembroke's voice wavered. You're alleging that your own father committed judicial murder, William said clearly. Premeditated, calculated, and executed through deliberate corruption of the courts. Yes, my lord. That is exactly what I'm alleging. Because that is exactly what the evidence proves. He produced another document. This is a letter from my father's personal archive, written to Margaret Whitmore, later Margaret Winter, documenting 2 years of obsessive pursuit after she refused his courtship. The letters detail his rage when she chose Thomas Winter, a common solicitor over a duke. They document his descent into vengeful obsession. William's voice never wavered, but Emily could see the cost of each word in the tension of his shoulders, the white-knuckled grip on the podium's edge. In a letter dated May 1806, William continued, written on the day of Thomas Winter's execution, my father confesses, I have destroyed the man I hated and lost the woman I loved, and I am beginning to understand that this is what damnation feels like. He kept these letters, my lords, preserved them, because somewhere in his corrupted conscience, he knew what he had done. The chamber erupted. Voices rose in shock, denial, outrage. Lord Ashford was on his feet, shouting about family honor. Lady Catherine Hesse, watching from the gallery, had gone pale as death. Lord Chancellor Pembroke called for order, his gavel cracking like thunder. The House will come to order. Your Grace, you understand what you're asking us to accept? That a peer of this realm, a respected magistrate for 40 years, deliberately murdered an innocent man. I'm not asking you to accept it, William said. I'm presenting irrefutable documentary evidence that proves it. The question before this House isn't whether my father committed these crimes. The evidence makes that undeniable. The question is whether we, as the guardians of British justice, will acknowledge and rectify this corruption, or whether we will choose complicity through silence. He straightened, and Emily saw him transform into something beyond duke or son, into an instrument of pure, relentless truth. Thomas Winter was a good man, a solicitor who defended the poor and believed in the law's capacity for justice. He was convicted on fabricated evidence, executed on a false charge, and remembered as a traitor, all because my father couldn't accept that a woman of quality chose love over station. William's voice roughened slightly. For 20 years, Thomas Winter's name has been synonymous with treason. His daughter, he gestured toward Emily in the gallery, has lived under the shadow of her father's supposed crimes, denied her inheritance, her place in society, her very identity. And all of it was built on lies constructed by a man who believed his title placed him above justice. The chamber was absolutely silent now. Every eye was fixed on William. I stand before you today not as Duke William Hesse, defender of my family's legacy, he said, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. I stand here as a man who has discovered his inheritance was built on murder. And I choose truth over blood, justice over legacy. I choose to condemn my own father so that an innocent man's name can finally be cleared. He placed the final documents on the table. I formally petition this House to posthumously pardon Thomas Winter of all charges, to conduct a full inquiry into my father's tenure as magistrate, and to ensure that no man, regardless of station, can ever again pervert justice for personal revenge. William stepped back from the podium. I yield to the House's judgment. The silence stretched for a long moment. Then Lord Chancellor Pembroke spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of what they'd just heard. This House will vote on the petition for posthumous pardon. All in favor of clearing Thomas Winter of charges of treason and acknowledging wrongful execution, signify by saying aye. The first aye came from an unexpected source. Old Duke Norfolk, who'd served with Albert Hesse for 30 years. Then another. And another. Like a dam breaking, the voices rose until they filled the chamber. All opposed. Scattered silence. Perhaps a dozen voices, led by Lord Ashford, holding firm to denial. But they were drowned by the overwhelming majority. The motion passes, Lord Chancellor Pembroke announced. Thomas Winter is hereby posthumously pardoned and his conviction vacated. Let the record show that this House acknowledges grave judicial misconduct in his prosecution and execution. Emily's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. 20 years. 20 years her father had been branded a traitor. And now, in one vote, his name was cleared. Furthermore, Pembroke continued, this House will convene a special inquiry into all cases presided over by Duke Albert Hesse during his tenure. Any convictions showing irregularities will be reviewed and potentially overturned. Lord Marlborough stood, his face twisted with fury. This is a betrayal of everything. This is justice, William said quietly. Finally, the session concluded in chaos. Peers arguing, reporters rushing to spread the news, the gallery erupting in shocked conversation. Emily remained frozen in her seat, watching as William gathered his documents with careful, methodical movements. And then she saw it begin. Lord Ashford brushed past William without acknowledging him. Then Lord Pemberton. Then the Duke of Somerset, who'd been a family friend for 3 generations. One by one, the peers of the realm turned their backs on William Hesse, literally and figuratively. His aunt, Lady Catherine, stood in the gallery, her face a mask of cold fury. She met William's eyes across the chamber and shook her head once, a gesture of absolute rejection. By the time the chamber emptied, William stood alone at the presenter's podium, surrounded by the evidence that had vindicated Emily's father and destroyed his own legacy. Emily made her way down from the gallery. The few remaining lords gave her a wide berth, as if she carried some contagion. She didn't care. She crossed the marble floor to where William stood, still gripping the podium's edge like a man bracing against a storm. "William," she said softly. He looked up, and the expression in his eyes made her chest ache. Not regret, not doubt, but the terrible awareness of what he'd just sacrificed, and what it had cost him. "It's done," he said. "Your father's name is cleared. Because of you. Because it was right." William released the podium, straightening his shoulders. "Because some legacies don't deserve to survive, no matter what they cost to destroy." Emily looked around the empty chamber. "They've all turned on you. I expected nothing less. Your friends. Your family. Your entire social circle. They were never truly mine if they valued a lie over truth," William said. He began collecting the documents, organizing them with the same careful precision he'd shown throughout their investigation. "I always knew this would be the price." "Was it worth it?" Emily asked quietly. William stopped, looking at her fully. In his eyes, Emily saw exhaustion, grief, loss, but also something unshakable and absolute. "Yes," he said simply. "Your father's innocence is proven. The corruption that killed him is exposed. And justice, however delayed, has finally been served." He managed a small, sad smile. How could that not be worth it? Around them, the chamber stood empty and silent. The house of Hesse had fallen. William's social death had begun. Everything he'd inherited, everything he'd been raised to protect, lay in ruins around him. But standing in the wreckage of his legacy, stripped of title's protection and society's approval, William Hesse had never looked more like a man of honor. "We should go," Emily said gently, "before the reporters find us." William nodded, gathering the last of their evidence. Together, they walked from the chamber where power had finally turned on itself. Behind them, the legacy of Duke Albert Hesse crumbled into truth and condemnation. Ahead of them lay uncertainty, social exile, and a future neither could predict. But for the first time in 20 years, Thomas Winter's name was clear. And the man who'd cleared it stood alone in his victory, having sacrificed everything to choose justice over blood. The house of Hesse had fallen. And from its ruins, something new, something honest, had been born. The letters arrived in batches over the following week. "Your membership in the Royal Society has been terminated. The Board of Trustees has voted to remove you from all charitable committees. Your presence at the Duke of Somerset's gala is no longer welcome." William read each one with careful attention, then filed them in neat stacks. Emily watched from across the room, her heart breaking at the systematic dismantling of everything he'd built outside his inherited title. "That's the last of my club memberships," William said, setting down a letter from White's. "I'm now officially persona non grata in every gentleman's establishment in London." "I'm sorry," Emily said quietly. "Don't be." His voice was steady, but exhaustion shadowed his eyes. "They're protecting themselves. If they associate with me, they acknowledge the system failed. Better to exile me and pretend I'm the aberration." A knock interrupted them. William's butler, one of the few servants who hadn't resigned, entered with a card on a silver tray. "Lord Ashford to see you, Your Grace. He insists it's urgent." William's jaw tightened. "Show him in." Ashford entered like a man on a mission, face flushed with anger. He didn't acknowledge Emily, focusing entirely on William. I came to give you one final chance, Ashford said without preamble. Recant. Tell Parliament you were deceived by this woman's fabrications. They might allow you back into society if you do it now. The damage is already irreparable, William said calmly. My father committed judicial murder. That's not a mistake I can recant. Your father was a great man. My father was a murderer who perverted justice, William corrected. The evidence is irrefutable, as you well know. Ashford's face darkened. You've destroyed everything. Your reputation, your family's legacy, your future. And for what? A dead solicitor and his conniving daughter. For the truth, William said, voice hardening. Something you've apparently forgotten the value of. You chose a servant over your own class. Over loyalty to your blood. You're a traitor to your own kind, Hess. If my kind requires me to protect murderers, then I'm proud to betray it. Ashford stared at him, something like pity flickering in his expression. You'll die alone and unmourned. Despised by everyone who once called you friend. Was she worth that? William didn't look at Emily. Yes. Ashford left without another word. The silence he left behind was heavy with finality. Emily moved to the window. Outside, a carriage bearing the Ashford crest departed. The last bridge burning. You should go, William said quietly behind her. Emily turned. What? To the reception. The one being held in your honor. William gestured to the invitation, a formal request from the Society of Legal Reform to celebrate the vindication of Thomas Winter. You've been invited to speak about your father's legacy. I'm not leaving you alone right now. Emily. His voice was gentle but firm. Your father's name is cleared. You're being acknowledged as a hero who exposed systemic corruption. You have invitations from law societies. Newspapers want your account. The Legal Aid Society has offered you a position as an advocate for wrongful convictions. I know, but you're finally free. Respected. Vindicated. Everything you fought for, you've achieved. You don't need to stay here and watch me become a social pariah. Emily studied his face, seeing what he wasn't saying. You're pushing me away. I'm protecting your future. If you stay associated with me, you'll be tainted by my disgrace. The same society celebrating you now will turn on you if they think we're more than professional associates. And are we? Emily asked quietly. More than that. William's expression cracked, showing carefully concealed grief. It doesn't matter what we are. What matters is that you have a chance at the life you deserve. I won't let my ruin destroy that for you. So you're making the choice for me. I'm asking you to think about your future. I am thinking about it, Emily said, moving closer. And my future doesn't look the way you're imagining. William shook his head. Emily, I have nothing to offer you now. No social standing. No connections. No future in any circle that matters. I'm a duke in name only, a title attached to a pariah. In 6 months, I'll be lucky if I can maintain this house. Everything else is gone or going. Good, Emily said. William blinked. What? Good, Emily repeated, closing the distance until she stood directly before him. Because I never wanted the Duke of Hesse. I never wanted social standing or connections or a place in circles that protect murderers. I wanted the man who chose truth over legacy, who destroyed everything he had to clear my father's name, who stood alone in Parliament and condemned his own blood because it was right. Emily, you think I fought for 6 years to vindicate my father's name so I could join the same hypocritical society that killed him? I don't want their approval, William. I never did. Then what do you want? You, Emily said simply. I want the man who spent sleepless nights reading trial records, who grieved for my father even though he never knew him, who looked at evidence of his own father's crimes and chose justice anyway. I want William Hesse, not the Duke, not the title, not the legacy. Just the man. William's control finally shattered. I can't ask you to throw away your future for me. You're not asking. I'm choosing. Emily reached up, touching his face gently. Just like you chose to stand beside me in that archive. Just like you chose to present evidence that destroyed everything you'd inherited. Just like you've chosen truth again and again, even when it cost you everything. I have nothing left to give you, William said, voice breaking. No wealth, no status. You have yourself, Emily interrupted. Your integrity. Your courage. Your absolutely infuriating nobility that makes you try to push me away to protect me from a future I don't even want. That's everything, William. That's more than enough. William stared at her, years of aristocratic training warring with raw emotion. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I love you. God help me, Emily, I love you. I've loved you since I watched you hold my father's ring against your heart like it meant something. Since I saw you piece together evidence with hands that trembled but never stopped. Since you stood in that courtroom and didn't flinch when they tried to discredit you. Emily's breath caught. William. But I can't, I won't, let you sacrifice your future for me. You've spent 6 years fighting for justice. You've earned peace. Recognition. A life without the stain of my family's crimes. And what about what I've earned from you? Emily asked. Don't I get to choose who I love? Who I stand beside? Or are you going to take that choice from me the way everyone else has tried to take my choices my entire life? William's hands came up, almost touching her shoulders before falling back. You deserve better than a disgraced duke. I deserve the man I love, Emily said firmly. Who happens to be you. Disgraced or not. The words hung between them. William's expression transformed. Shock, hope, fear, and desperate longing warring for dominance. You love me? He asked as if he couldn't quite believe it. Deeply. Inconveniently. Completely. Emily smiled through tears. I love you for destroying your legacy. For choosing my father's truth over your father's lies. For being the most honorable man I've ever known, even when honor meant losing everything. William's control broke entirely. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like something precious he'd been afraid to touch. Emily felt his heart pounding, felt the tremor in his hands as they tangled in her hair. I don't deserve you, he murmured against her temple. Probably not, Emily agreed. But you're stuck with me anyway. William laughed, a sound caught between grief and joy. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I love you, he said again, clearer now. Certain. I love you, and I have no idea what our future looks like. I can't give you society. Can't give you the life you should have had. Can't even promise you comfort or security. Then give me truth, Emily said. Give me partnership. Give me a man who chooses right over easy. That's all I want. That's all I've ever wanted. William cupped her face in his hands, thumb brushing away her tears. The world is going to say terrible things about us. About you. They'll say you seduced me, that you're a social climber, that you manipulated me into destroying my family. Let them say it. I don't care. I do, William said fiercely. I care about protecting you from the viciousness of people who can't accept that their system was corrupt. Then protect me by standing beside me, Emily said. Not by pushing me away. William's expression softened. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. You're absolutely certain. Once we do this, once we're together publicly, there's no going back. You'll be tied to my disgrace. I'm already tied to you, Emily said. Have been since the moment you asked me why I was holding the ring like it was already mine. Since you chose investigation over arrest. Since you stood in Parliament and condemned your own father because it was right. William's hands trembled against her face. Then, slowly, deliberately, he closed the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was still afraid she might change her mind. But Emily pressed closer, hands fisting in his shirt, and the kiss deepened into something that spoke of months of restraint finally released. Of grief shared and justice won. Of two people who'd found each other in the ruins of a legacy that never should have stood. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, William rested his forehead against hers again. I should give you something, he said. A token. A promise. But I have nothing left of value except... He stopped, realization dawning. William reached into his waistcoat pocket, pulling out the signet ring. The one that had started everything. This was never mine by right, William said quietly. It was your father's. A gift given in friendship before friendship became revenge. And now... He took Emily's hand, placing the ring carefully in her palm. Now it's yours. Not as stolen property or recovered evidence, but as a symbol of what we've built from the ashes of what my father destroyed. Emily looked down at the ring, the gold band that had carried her father's warmth, that had been pressed against her heart the night William found her, that had proven a connection between their families that transcended hatred. It's too large for me, she said, voice thick with emotion. I know. William's smile was soft. But maybe you could wear it on a chain? Keep it close. And someday, when we're ready, we'll have it resized. Make it into something new. A promise ring. An engagement ring. Whatever you want it to be. Not an inheritance, Emily said, understanding. A choice. Yes. William's hands closed around hers, the ring between their joined palms. My choice. Your choice. Our choice to build something honest from the ruins of something corrupt. Emily looked up at him. This man who'd lost everything and somehow found himself. Who'd been Duke William Hess and was learning to be simply William. Who loved her enough to push her away and loved her enough to let her stay when she refused to go. I accept, she said. Not a duke. Not a title. Not a legacy. Just you. Just this. Just us. William pulled her close again, and Emily felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This was what her father had believed in. Not the law as it was practiced, but as it could be. Justice chosen freely. Love given honestly. Truth preferred to comfort. Outside, London continued its gossip and scandal. Society turned its back on the Duke who'd betrayed his own kind. But inside this study, in this moment, two people stood together in the wreckage of the past and chose to build something new from its fragments. Emily Winter and William Hess. Not maid and duke. Not victim and heir. Just two people who'd chosen each other after every other choice had been stripped away. And that, Emily thought as William held her close, was worth more than any legacy built on lies. The ring that had once symbolized betrayal now symbolized chosen love. The man who'd been born to privilege now stood on merit alone. And the woman who'd fought for justice had finally found something more precious. A partner who chose truth at any cost. After the ruin, something beautiful had begun. 1 year later. The offices of Winter and Hess Legal Advocacy occupied a modest building in Clerkenwell, far from the grand estates and prestigious addresses of London's legal elite. The brass nameplate beside the door was simple and unadorned, but Emily touched it every morning with quiet pride as she entered. Her father's name. Restored. Honored. Carried forward. Inside, the main room buzzed with purposeful activity. 3 clerks worked at their desks, reviewing case files. A young solicitor consulted with a client, a factory worker seeking compensation for an injury. In the corner, a woman waited nervously, clutching papers that documented her wrongful eviction. This was what her father had believed in. Justice accessible to those who couldn't afford it. Law used as a shield for the powerless rather than a weapon for the privileged. Emily made her way to the private office at the back, where William sat surrounded by documents, his shirt sleeves rolled up, reading spectacles perched on his nose. He looked up when she entered, and his smile transformed his entire face. Mrs. Hess, he greeted her, warmth in his voice. Mr. Hess, Emily replied, matching his tone. They'd married 6 months ago in a quiet ceremony with no aristocratic guests and no grand celebration. Just Emily, William, a handful of her father's old colleagues, and the simple exchange of vows that meant more than any society wedding could have. She'd taken his name not because tradition demanded it, but because she'd wanted to. Because Emily Hess felt like a reclamation. Taking the name of the family that had destroyed hers and rebuilding it into something her father would have recognized. Something honest. William had given up his seat in the House of Lords 3 months after their marriage. Not because he was forced to, but because he'd chosen to. The title remained his by law, but he no longer used it in any meaningful way. To their clients, to the world they now inhabited, he was simply William Hess, solicitor and advocate for judicial reform. The Patterson case? Emily asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. Their desk now, really. They shared everything. Settlement offer came through this morning. Full compensation plus public acknowledgement of wrongful termination. William removed his spectacles, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He accepted. His family can keep their home. Good. Emily reviewed the case notes William had prepared. His handwriting covered the margins. Detailed, meticulous observations. The same precision he'd once applied to destroying his father's legacy, now directed toward building something new. That's the third successful case this month. Fourth. William corrected. Mrs. Chen's wrongful conviction was overturned yesterday. You were with the Alderman case, so you missed the notification. Emily's throat tightened. Mrs. Chen had spent 2 years in prison for a theft she hadn't committed, convicted on circumstantial evidence by a magistrate who'd assumed guilt based on her Chinese heritage. The kind of casual prejudice that permeated the legal system and destroyed innocent lives. The kind of injustice her father, and now she and William, fought against. How many does that make total? Emily asked. Since we opened. William consulted his ledger. 23 wrongful convictions overturned. 47 civil cases settled in favor of workers against employers. 15 families saved from unlawful evictions. He looked up. And 6 formal complaints filed against sitting magistrates for judicial misconduct. Your father's legacy, Emily said quietly, is being systematically dismantled. As it should be. William's expression was peaceful. Every case we win is another crack in the system he represented. Another step toward the kind of justice your father believed in. A knock interrupted them. Daniel, their senior clerk, entered with a letter. This just arrived. From the Lord Chancellor's office. Emily and William exchanged glances. Official correspondence from Parliament was never good news. Not for them. William opened the letter, scanning its contents. His eyebrows rose. What is it? Emily asked. They're establishing a permanent commission to review historical convictions for evidence of judicial misconduct, William read aloud. And they're requesting our consultation on the review process. Specifically, they want us to help develop standards for identifying fabricated evidence and corrupted proceedings. Emily stared at him. They're asking us to help reform the system? Not us specifically. It says here, Winter and Hess Legal Advocacy, given their documented expertise in exposing judicial corruption. William's smile was wry. They won't acknowledge me as Duke. Won't invite me to social functions. But they'll use our work to fix the mess they helped create. Will you do it? William looked at her, and Emily saw the man he'd become in the lines of his face. Older than a year should have made him, marked by sleepless nights and hard-won victories. But also more settled. More certain of who he was without the title's weight. Only if you do it with me, he said. This was never my fight alone. Our fight, Emily agreed. Always. They worked through the afternoon, drafting their response to the commission's request. As the light faded outside their window, Emily stood to light the lamps. The office had no grand chandeliers like the Hess estate, no imported candelabras or crystal fixtures. Just simple oil lamps that cast warm, steady light across their shared workspace. William finished the letter and set down his pen, watching Emily move through the familiar ritual of preparing the office for evening. She felt his gaze and turned. What? I was just thinking, William said, about the night I found you in my father's study. How different everything looked in that candlelight. Emily moved to his desk, perching on its edge. You mean when I was a thief and you were a duke? When you were a woman seeking justice and I was a man living a lie, William corrected. He reached into his waistcoat pocket, a gesture so familiar now Emily knew what was coming before he withdrew it. The ring. Her father's ring. They'd had it resized months ago, fitted to Emily's finger. But she still wore it on a chain around her neck, close to her heart. Some symbols were too important to risk losing. William took the chain gently, lifting it over her head. "May I?" Emily extended her left hand. They'd done this before, a private ritual they shared when the work became heavy, when the weight of what they'd lost threatened to overwhelm what they'd gained. William slid the ring onto her finger beside her simple wedding band. The two rings nested together. One gold, one silver. One inheritance, one choice. Both symbols of love that had survived everything that should have destroyed it. "Do you remember," William said softly, "what you told me that first night? When I asked why you were holding it like it was already yours." "I said it was never yours to begin with," Emily recalled. "And you were right." William's thumb brushed across the ring on her finger. "It wasn't mine. It was your father's. Then it became evidence. Then a symbol of betrayal. And now it's ours," Emily finished. "A reminder of what we built from the ashes of what your father destroyed." William pulled her closer, and Emily slid from the desk into his lap, fitting against him with the ease of a year's practice. Outside their office, London continued its relentless pace. The city that had rejected them, that had turned its back when they chose truth over power. But here, in this modest office with its simple furnishings and its purposeful work, they'd built something that mattered more than acceptance. They'd built a legacy of accountability. A practice dedicated to the kind of justice her father had died believing in. A partnership between equals that society insisted shouldn't exist. "Do you ever regret it?" Emily asked quietly. "Everything you gave up?" William was silent for a moment, his hand moving in slow circles against her back. "I regret that my father's crimes cost your family so much. I regret the years you spent alone fighting for vindication. I regret that exposing the truth required destroying everything I'd been taught to value. But I don't regret choosing you. Choosing this. Choosing truth over the comfortable lie I could have kept living." William pressed a kiss to her temple. "I lost a title's weight. I gained a purpose. I lost society's approval. I gained a partner who sees me as I actually am, not who I was born to be." "A poor trade by aristocratic standards," Emily said. "The best trade I ever made by any standard that matters." Emily turned in his arms, framing his face with her hands. The candlelight caught in his gray eyes, the same eyes that had confronted her in his father's study, that had watched her piece together evidence, that had looked at her with love even when loving her cost him everything. "I love you," she said, simple and absolute. The city that had rejected them, that had turned its back when they chose truth over power. But here, in this modest office with its simple furnishings and its purposeful work, they'd built something that mattered more than acceptance. They'd built a legacy of accountability. A practice dedicated to the kind of justice her father had died believing in. A partnership between equals that society insisted shouldn't exist. "Do you ever regret it?" Emily asked quietly. "Everything you gave up?" William was silent for a moment, his hand moving in slow circles against her back. "I regret that my father's crimes cost your family so much. I regret the years you spent alone fighting for vindication. I regret that exposing the truth required destroying everything I'd been taught to value. But I don't regret choosing you. Choosing this. Choosing truth over the comfortable lie I could have kept living." William pressed a kiss to her temple. "I lost a title's weight. I gained a purpose. I lost society's approval. I gained a partner who sees me as I actually am, not who I was born to be." "A poor trade by aristocratic standards," Emily said. "The best trade I ever made by any standard that matters." Emily turned in his arms, framing his face with her hands. The candlelight caught in his gray eyes, the same eyes that had confronted her in his father's study, that had watched her piece together evidence, that had looked at her with love even when loving her cost him everything. "I love you," she said, simple and absolute. "I love you," William replied, equally certain. They kissed in the gathering darkness, surrounded by case files and legal documents, by the evidence of work that mattered and lives changed. The ring pressed between them, a circle of gold that had traveled from friendship to betrayal to evidence to love. Outside, the clock tower struck 8. Their clerks had gone home hours ago. The city settled into its evening rhythms. But here, in this office that bore both their names, Emily Winter and William Hess remained. Working. Planning. Building a legacy that had nothing to do with inherited power, and everything to do with chosen purpose. The signet ring gleamed in the candlelight, warm against Emily's finger, just like it had been that first night, when she'd held it against her heart and a duke had asked her why. But everything else had changed. She was no longer a maid hiding in shadows, searching desperately for proof. He was no longer a duke defined by his father's legacy. They were partners. Advocates. Two people who'd found each other in the ruins of corruption and built something honest from its fragments. "We should go home," William murmured eventually. "It's late." "Home," Emily repeated, savoring the word. They'd sold the Grand Hess estate months ago, using the funds to establish their practice and support the families of others wrongfully convicted. Their home now was a modest townhouse in Bloomsbury. Comfortable but unremarkable. The kind of place a working solicitor and his wife might live. The kind of place her father would have recognized. 5 more minutes, Emily said, settling more comfortably against William. "Let me just finish reviewing the Morrison brief." William's laugh was soft against her hair. "You said that an hour ago. And I meant it then too." They stayed, working in comfortable silence, until the candles burned low and the city outside grew quiet. And when they finally locked the office door and walked through London's dark streets toward home, they walked as equals. The ring Emily wore spoke of a past that couldn't be erased. Her father's murder, her mother's grief, 20 years of injustice. But it also spoke of truth finally told. Of love chosen despite every obstacle. Of legacy redefined not through inheritance but through integrity. Power, Emily had learned, was temporary. Titles were accidents of birth. Legacy was what you built with your own hands, not what you inherited from corrupted foundations. And what remained when power was gone? Everything that mattered. Love, truth, partnership, purpose. The things that couldn't be taken away because they'd been chosen freely. The things worth fighting for. The things worth destroying an empire to claim. Emily looked at William walking beside her, his hand warm in hers, and knew her father would have approved. Not of the scandal or the suffering or the years of grief, but of this. The outcome. The man who'd chosen justice over blood. The woman who'd fought for truth and found love in its pursuit. The partnership built on equality rather than station. Thomas Winter had believed the law could be a force for good. His daughter had proven him right. And in doing so, she'd redeemed not just his name, but the very meaning of legacy itself. The past couldn't be erased, but it could be redeemed through truth. And love, real love, chosen love, love that cost everything and gave back more, could transform even the darkest inheritance into something beautiful. The house of Hess had fallen, but from its ashes, something better had been born. Something honest. Something worth building. Something called home.